Well, the disastrous flooding in Houston caused by Hurricane Harvey could send more than 30,000 residents into shelters. You know, our reporters telling us most of them are at capacity already. And while nothing could have been done to stop the hurricane from making landfall, the widespread flooding and the reported damage, well, was there enough done to prepare for the fallout of a natural disaster like this one? That's some of the debate that's going on. Joining us now to discuss how cities can prepare for flooding, like what we're seeing in Houston, is McGillivray. He's the managing director for the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. I was joking this morning at the morning meeting. What a title.
Absolutely.
Catastrophic. All right. You know, we said we can't predict how much rain is going to fall somewhere, but there were warnings ahead of time. You know, what we're hearing from residents, especially one I spoke to yesterday, who said, I get that they didn't evacuate us, but I feel like they could have done more to be prepared for having this many people around with this kind of rainfall. Could they really have been truly prepared for something like this?
Certainly. I mean, first thing we have to recognize is that 50 inches of rain is a lot of rain. And there's not a city on earth that would come out of this unscathed. That doesn't mean you don't do anything. You know, one of the things that we're looking at right now is overdevelopment in that area and the gobbling up of green space and wetlands and things of that nature. That's a big part of the problem.
Well, you and I know that a lot of times that comes down to politics. You can have people who are saying, look, we need to plan for natural disasters, fire and for flooding. But, you know, those contractors are awarded contracts for a reason, right? There's money in development, and prevention and risk avoidance is expensive.
Well, it's expensive, certainly, but inaction is way more expensive. And we find that out the hard way time and time and time again. But my view, I think, is that local governments often aren't the ones holding the bag after a disaster. So they are entranced by the lure of development. You know, tax base increases. That's a great thing. And when a disaster like this happens, they don't have to pay for it. The more senior governments usually come in and pay for the disaster. So there's a disconnect there. And I think that has to be corrected. What's
your assessment when you've watched some of the pictures coming out of Houston? You know, where were the misses here?
Well, I think just as I mentioned, the overdevelopment of that area in the past many years. I saw one number that over more than a 10-year period, they paved over 56,000 acres of wetlands alone. And, you know, how would that city perform right now if those wetlands were still in existence? That's one of the big issues, I think.
Preparation, of course, is different for every city because there's topography is different. You've got, you know, different weather patterns that are, you know, that can often come through certain areas. You know, Kelsey was explaining to us that this is an area that hasn't seen really big storms in a really long time. So that's not top of mind for people.
Well, they haven't seen some big hurricanes over the last few years, but they have had some really big floods. They had one earlier last year, something like 10 inches in a short period of time. And then 11 months before that. So they get some really big floods in Houston, and I think they know better. They have been working. I don't want to give the impression that they haven't been doing anything. But could they have done more? Well, that remains to be seen.
In your expert opinion, what's the most important thing a city can do in preparing for flooding?
I think they have to look at the long term. And you know, the existence of greenlands and wetlands are really, really key. We're paving over everything. In North America, every city that's developing in North America, this is the same problem. More pavement and more rooftops of big box stores and things of that nature. There's just no place for the water to go. You know, we saw it in Toronto a few years ago. We saw it in Gatineau, in Ottawa, in southern Alberta. It's happening everywhere. We really have to look at the long view and what we're going to do with all this water, particularly as climate change grabs hold even more.
What lessons can we learn and take away from what we're seeing in Houston?
Well, I think that long view and just the lure of development isn't as sweet as it seems. And I think we have to value the importance of things like wetlands, greenlands, urban planning in general, just how we lay out cities, and sprawl. Urban sprawl is a big problem. So, I mean, density is the way to go.
What's the attitude here in Canada? You know, there's certain parts of Canada that see flooding every year. We do these stories. Other ones, like you mentioned in Toronto, doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's a big mess and a big problem. What's the picture like for us here as investment in disaster preparedness and investment into that infrastructure?
Yeah, I don't think we should be too smug in Canada. We face many of the same problems. We don't get 50 inches of rain in our cities, but we get enough. And you know, that flood in Toronto in 2013, that was from 4.5 inches of rain. So you know, we really have to do, I think, a better job at investment in infrastructure and preparedness and things like that. Lots happening, but much more needs to be done, that's for sure.
Great to have your perspective on what's happening down in Houston, Glenn. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.